All right, get ready, everyone, because today we are taking a deep dive into something I know you all really want to explore, figuring out how to find happiness and meaning in a world where everything feels like it's constantly changing on us.
Yeah, it's a question people have been wrestling with forever, and it feels especially relevant these days with everything going on in the world and just the pace of modern life.
Totally. And it looks like you've brought some really interesting sources to help us unpack it. We've got Brian Johnson, and he's coming at it from that more philosophical angle. Then we've got a bit of literary analysis with Sandra J. Lindau's work on Ursula K. Le Guin, which I'm really excited to dig into. And just to round things out, why not throw in some ancient wisdom from the Tao Te Ching?
Yeah. Exactly. And what we'll see is that even though these sources come from totally different perspectives, they all speak to this, well, universal human need to figure out what it all means, to find happiness and to navigate all the ups and downs of life.
It's like the fundamental questions,
Yeah.
right? How to live a good life. And I think the good place to start, as good a place as any, I guess, is with this idea of happiness. We all want it, right? Brian Johnson talks about this happiness pie chart idea where he says only 40% of our happiness is actually within our control. Kind of depressing when you first hear that, right?
Yeah, I can see how you'd think that. But, I actually think framing it as only 40% kind of misses the point. When you really think about it, it's actually pretty empowering. Think about it. We tend to get so fixated on these things that we think are going to magically make us happy.
Hmm.
Like getting a promotion, finding the perfect partner, or winning the lottery even. But honestly, so much of that stuff is, well, it's just out of our control. And spending all your time and energy focusing on that other 60% is, well, it's kind of a recipe for disaster, isn't it? You are just setting yourself up for frustration and disappointment.
So what you're saying is it's about focusing on what we can control, which, according to Johnson at least, is still a pretty sizable 40%. And I'll be honest, I know I can get so caught up in trying to force those external situations that I forget to, I don't know, look inside.
And I think that's where the Tao Te Ching just pairs so well with Johnson's view. There's this one line and it says, being one with the Tao is to be at peace, and to be in conflict with it leads to chaos and dysfunction. And I feel like what it's getting at, like the essence of it, is that it's about accepting what is rather than fighting for what you think should be. By doing that, by aligning yourself with how things already are, that's where you find that true peace, contentment, all of that.
Finding that inner harmony rather than always searching for validation from outside ourselves.
Yeah.
It's funny, though, because Johnson has some pretty, well, how do I put this? Unconventional, yeah, unconventional ideas about how we actually get to that place of inner harmony, how we maximize that 40% we were just talking about. Have you ever tried that thing he talks about where you talk to yourself in the third person, like you call yourself self?
Oh, yeah.
Because I gotta be honest, when I read that in his blog, I was like, what is this guy talking about? Like, am I supposed to start every morning giving myself a pep talk in the mirror, but I'm calling myself It did seem a little,
Out there.
yeah, a little out there. It's like trying to give yourself a little bit of tough love, right? A little coaching session.
Uh-huh.
Okay, but speaking of mindset, this feels like a perfect bridge to the next big thing we wanted to chat about. Change and how to deal with it. I mean, we all go through it, right? It's part of life. But why does it always feel so impossible, even when it's a good change?
Yeah. It's funny, isn't it, how change can be such a wild ride. And, I think Brian Johnson totally nails it when he talks about that, what does he call it? Oh, yeah, the hedonic treadmill.
Yeah.
Right. But so, he's talking about that feeling of always needing more to be happy. Like you get the next achievement, you buy the next thing you've been wanting, you hit the next big milestone in your life, and you think, okay, now I'll be happy. But a lot of times it's not about the destination, right? It's about the actual journey.
Yeah, there's that saying, I'm not sure where I first heard it, but it's something like, you spend your whole life climbing the ladder of success only to realize it's leaning against the wrong wall. It's so true, though, I think. We spend all this time and energy chasing these things, these external things, thinking that's what happiness is, and we forget to just enjoy where we are at.
And that is exactly where Ursula K. Le Guin's ideas are just like, whoa. Lindo, in her book Dancing the Tao, she talks about how Le Guin uses this metaphor of life as a carrier bag. So instead of thinking of life as this straight path to some end goal, it's more like, well, we each have this bag that we carry with us, and it's always getting filled up with experiences, good ones and bad ones.
So instead of always focusing on the end goal, on the outcome, it's more about being present in the journey itself. It's messy, unpredictable, and yeah, sometimes it throws us for a loop, but it's about being open to that whole experience.
Totally. And Lindo, she talks about how Le Guin, well, her work at least, really emphasizes that life is all about, like these beginnings without ends, initiations, losses, transformations, and translations. It's about riding the waves, all the ups and downs, the growth, the change, not about reaching some finish line.
Which, I mean, let's be real, can be a really tough pill to swallow, especially these days with social media and everyone telling you hustle, 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 achieve all the things, be the best. It's easy to fall into that trap of thinking, okay, I just need to hit this one goal and then I'll be happy.
Oh, I know. Tell me about it.
Yeah.
It's like we are hardwired for that kind of thinking.
Yeah.
But I think if we can try to shift our perspective even a little bit and embrace that carrier bag idea we were talking about, we might start to see all the little things, even the hard things, as important parts of the journey. Every challenge we overcome, every time we fall and get back up, all of those moments of joy we experience, they all add to our bag and they shape us into the people we are becoming.
So what can we do? How can we change the way we think about change itself? Instead of fearing it or resisting it, how can we get to a place where we can actually, embrace it? I mean, especially when it feels scary, right?
That is the million-dollar question, isn't it?
Yeah.
There's this line from the Tao Te Ching that I think about a lot. It's like really powerful. It says, all things change. If you realize that all things change, there is nothing you will try to hold on to. And there's so much just like wisdom packed into that,
Yeah.
There's this deep acceptance woven into it.
It's like they're saying, if we just accept that we can't control everything, if we can really understand that change is always going to happen, then, well, we can stop torturing ourselves, right? Like, it takes so much energy to fight against the
Yeah.
current.
You get it. And even when you get it, even when you understand it intellectually, it can still be scary, right? Putting it into practice is a whole other thing. This is where I think Brian Johnson's one small step philosophy can be really helpful. He talks about how important it is to break down these big, overwhelming changes into smaller, more manageable things.
It's like that saying, how do you eat an elephant? One bite at a time. It's too much to take in all at once. You'll just overwhelm yourself.
Yes, that's it. And it's about not letting yourself get stuck in that feeling of being overwhelmed, because you just end up doing nothing. One example Johnson gives is, he says, try committing to doing just one commercial break's worth of exercise every day. And when you think about it, it doesn't seem like much, right? But it's not about doing a crazy amount all at once. It's about doing something consistently. It's about building momentum. One small step, then another, then another.
It's about those micro habits, right? You build them up, and over time, they can really make a huge difference. And, I think it's interesting, this idea of making those small changes over time. That's in the Tao Te Ching, too. There's a real emphasis on simplicity, on going with the natural flow of life, instead of trying to force things to happen the way you want when you want.
Yes. Like, stop swimming upstream.
Yeah.
And it speaks to that need for patience, right? And consistency. So we've talked about finding happiness in ourselves. We've talked about getting better at dealing with all the changes in life. But what about those times when, well, change comes in the form of hard times?
Yeah.
What about when we face those really difficult moments in life? How do we find meaning in the adversity?
Yeah, that's the real challenge, isn't it? Like, when things get rough, when life throws you a curveball, it's hard to see how anything good could come from that. But then there's Brian Johnson with, well, he calls it positive negativity. It's like even those tough experiences, the ones we don't want to deal with, they can still help us grow in the end, don't you think?
Oh, 100%. It's actually something Ursula K. Le Guin explores a lot in her writing. In Dancing the Tao, Lindo talks about this recurring theme in Le Guin's work, where her characters are always having to face that, shattered side of themselves, their flaws, their fears, all the things they don't like about themselves. And it's through those struggles, through facing the hard things, that they find their strength.
There's that quote, something like, the obstacle is the way, right? It's not about pretending the bad stuff isn't there. It's about going through it, learning from it, and coming out stronger on the other side.
Exactly. And think about Getter. In A Wizard of Earthsea, his whole journey is about confronting his shadow. And it's only when he finally faces that, his biggest fears and darkest impulses, that he can actually step into his full potential. And I think that's what I love about Le Guin's writing. Her characters, they aren't these perfect heroes. They mess up, they struggle, they're just trying to figure it all out, just like the rest of us.
Which I think makes them so much easier to relate to, makes them feel real.
And this is kind of random, but Lindo mentions how Le Guin thought that when she wrote, she was like channeling these voices from her subconscious. Isn't that wild? Makes you wonder, where does that come from? Our own inspiration, like those flashes of insight. And how do we learn to tap into it, especially when we feel lost? It's a good question. And honestly, I don't know if there's an easy answer. But I do think it speaks to how important it is to be willing to explore those deeper parts of ourselves,
Hmm.
even when it's uncomfortable. Both Johnson and Le Guin seem to be saying that a lot of times real growth, real transformation happens when we least expect it. In those moments of darkness or difficulty, that's when we discover just how strong we really are.
Like they say, the greatest growth comes from the greatest struggle. So, we've covered a lot of ground today. We've talked about finding happiness from within, accepting change as it comes, and even finding meaning in the hard times. If we had to narrow it all down, what do you think are the most important takeaways from all of this?
I think the Tao Te Ching really sums it up with those timeless truths that, well, they just never seem to get old. First and foremost, it's all about keeping things simple. There's that line, the sage lives his life quite simply. And I think that can apply to pretty much every area of our lives. Getting rid of all the clutter, not just physically, but mentally too. Simplifying our routines, our expectations, even our thoughts.
Getting rid of all that extra noise so we can focus on what really matters.
Yes, exactly. And then I think there's this emphasis on cultivating humility, like remembering that we are just one small part of this much bigger picture.
Mhm.
We don't have to control everything, and letting go of that need to control actually allows us to be more open, more accepting of what life throws at us.
And if we can get all that right, then maybe, just maybe, we find that place of contentment, that sufficiency that the Tao Te Ching talks about, where we can appreciate all that we have instead of always chasing after what we don't.
Yeah, it's about finding that balance between striving to be better and accepting where we are at this very
It's
moment.
like we've been given this amazing toolbox today, full of ancient wisdom and these modern, very practical insights, too, all to help us make sense of this crazy thing we call life.
And remember, you don't have to be an expert at all of it. Pick one thing, any one thing from today, and see if you can put it into practice. Start small. Remember, maybe you simplify just one part of your day, or start a gratitude practice, or even just like spend 5 minutes just sitting with yourself.
Life is all about filling up that carrier bag with as many good experiences as we can. So the question I have for you is, what will you choose today?